The boy's fever broke at midnight. But it wasn't healing. It was a trade. That's what Thomas Fletcher told the preacher before torching his own barn. Not a cure, not a miracle. A trade. Kansas, 1868. 4 brothers walked into a disease-stricken town and came out untouched. Everyone else was dying, mouths foaming, eyes rolling back, bones breaking under their own heat. But Ezra, Caleb, Josiah, and Abel Blackwood, they didn't just survive, they changed. Witnesses say they stopped casting shadows. Their voices echoed with unnatural harmonics that made grown men drop to their knees and bleed from the ears. A physician wrote, "Subjects have transcended human biological classification." That report vanished. So did the doctor. The state sealed the case. Science abandoned the story. Churches erased the records. Why? Because what the Blackwood brothers became was not human. And tonight, you're going to learn why. But I warn you, this is not entertainment. It's transformation. Once you know, you cannot unknow. Once you see the signs, they will never stop showing themselves. You're not here by accident. You've been called. Now step inside and don't look back. The trade has already begun. It began with faith, but it didn't end there. The Blackwood brothers were not drunkards, not charlatans, not madmen. They were men of discipline, steel-spined, scripture-obsessed, and utterly surrendered to the divine. Each morning at 4 o'clock a.m., they climbed the hill behind their farmhouse to a chapel they'd carved from Kansas limestone. No priest, no choir, just 4 voices chanting Hebrew verses as the prairie sun rose like judgment. They weren't seeking comfort, they were seeking alignment. They believed in what Josiah called primitive access, the raw channel between man and the divine, without institutional filters. They didn't just read the Bible, they dismantled it, took it apart like a machine, rearranged the pieces, reconstructed meaning, until one day it answered back. Josiah was the first to receive it, a formula scratched into the margins of a 14th century Latin manuscript. The writing wasn't human, it pulsed on the page. Abel called it the living scripture, and when they spoke it aloud during evening prayer, the wind stopped. Birds froze mid-flight. A silence fell over the prairie that didn't feel natural. Something heard them, and something answered. But here's the secret. When men ask heaven for power, sometimes it's not heaven that responds. The deaths in Cedar Ridge were never random. Dr. Morrison believed it was contaminated water. But the pattern told a different story. Families died in perfect symmetry. Youngest first, then oldest, then the mother, then the father. No survivors, no logical vectors of infection, no shared contact. Just one invisible selection, like a hand pointing from the sky. And the closer the victims lived to the Blackwood farm, the faster they died. But not the brothers. Not one fever. Not one symptom. They walked among the dead, untouched, their skin cold to the touch, their breath steady and calm as the grave. Then came the reports, the whispers from children, the confessions from half-mad survivors, that Josiah had entered homes before the victims fell ill, that he touched their foreheads, that he prayed in tongues no one could understand. Latin, some said, but others swore it was older than Latin, older than Babel. The disease didn't fear them. It obeyed them. And that was when the townspeople stopped calling them men of God and started calling them agents of something else. But no one dared confront them, because by then, everyone who questioned the brothers was already buried. On the night of August 14th, 1878, the sky over Cedar Ridge turned a shade of black no storm could explain. No lightning, no thunder, just a weight, like the air itself was watching. And under that weight, the Blackwood Chapel burned with light. Not fire, light. Witnesses miles away saw it. a column of gold rising straight into the heavens, silent, pulsing, and then gone. No ash, no smoke, just stillness. The next morning, the brothers emerged from their farmhouse changed. They walked differently, perfectly synchronized, as if their bodies moved to a rhythm no one else could hear. Their pupils had narrowed to slits, like the eyes of a nocturnal predator. And when Ezra spoke at the town meeting, it wasn't a sermon. It was a declaration. This was not wrath. It was selection. They didn't mourn the dead. They didn't offer comfort. They offered truth. That death had come to test the spiritual hierarchy, and only those prepared, only those who lived in harmony, would be spared. They weren't trying to convert anyone anymore. They were preparing for something, and deep in the soil beneath their chapel, something ancient had already awakened. The Methodist church in town tried to intervene. Pastor Wilkes, a war-hardened man who'd seen the horrors of Antietam, marched up to the Blackwood farm with a Bible in one hand and a Colt revolver in the other. He said he came to put down heresy, to confront whatever blasphemy had taken root in that limestone chapel. He never made it past the gate. Witnesses saw him freeze mid-step, as if struck by some unseen force. His body locked, his jaw unhinged, and then he dropped to the dirt, convulsing, muttering the same 7 syllables over and over in a language no one had ever heard. He was never able to speak again. The sheriff came 2 days later. He brought 6 deputies. None returned. That was the last time anyone from Cedar Ridge challenged the Blackwoods. The brothers stopped going to town. They had supplies delivered to the edge of their property, paid in gold coins no local bank could identify. The edges of the coins were worn smooth, their symbols unrecognizable, their weight unsettling. And those who held them too long reported vivid dreams, visions of impossible architecture, endless staircases, and voices without mouths chanting in perfect harmony. The kind of dreams that rot a man's soul. By the first frost of 1878, the prairie had fallen into a hush no season could explain. No birds, no coyotes, no wind through the wheat. Just silence, thick and waiting. That's when the children began speaking of the echoes. Not whispers, echoes. Voices repeating things they hadn't said. Dreams, repeating before they'd dreamed them. Some children awoke in the night speaking scripture they'd never learned, their eyes wide and glassy, their voices overlapping with each other's in perfect, layered harmony. Parents began to notice changes, shadows moving without a source, reflections in the mirror smiling when their children did not. All of them traced back to one place, the Blackwood farm. But when Dr. Morrison sent word to the Kansas State Medical Board, begging for investigation, a team did arrive. 3 doctors, 1 spiritual advisor, 2 soldiers. They stayed for 72 hours. On the 3rd night, the farmhouse lights flickered with unnatural intensity, and the sky glowed faintly green. By morning, only one of them remained, a corporal found walking naked in the wheat, whispering equations into the soil with a bloody stick. The state declared the matter classified. And the farm? It was left to rot. But the brothers never stopped working. They were preparing for return. The journals were discovered decades later, sealed in a lead-lined box beneath the foundation of the Blackwood Chapel ruins. They were not diaries. They were blueprints. Written in Josiah's hand, but annotated by all 4 brothers in distinct meticulous script, pages of diagrams, strange alphabets, and anatomical sketches of something, not human, not entirely. One entry read, "The fever purifies the vessel. Those who cannot withstand it were never chosen." Another, "The harmonic field is most responsive at 3:33 a.m. During prayer, the veil thins, light bends. But the most disturbing note, scribbled hastily in the margins of a burned page, simply said, 'We are no longer praying to him, we are praying with him.' And next to it, 4 symbols, identical to the ones etched on the coins. The brothers weren't following scripture anymore. They were decoding something older, something buried, a system of knowledge wrapped in faith but built to unlock transformation. Not salvation, not ascension, integration. When the fever took the town, the brothers invited it into themselves, and what returned in its place was neither disease nor divine. It was a signal, and it had found 4 willing receivers. It was Ezra who first stopped blinking. Caleb documented it with clinical precision, writing that his brother had gone 11 hours without a single eye movement, yet showed no discomfort. By day 3, Ezra's eyes reflected light like polished onyx, and when spoken to, he responded in 2 voices, one soft and deep, his own, and another, layered beneath it, dry and ancient, like wind through stone. Then Abel stopped sleeping. He would kneel in the chapel for 72 hours without food, water, or rest. When the others tried to move him, they couldn't. Not from stubbornness, but weight. His body grew heavier than stone, as if something else was anchoring him to the earth. Josiah recorded that during one of these vigils, Abel's spine began to twist, not break, not bend unnaturally, but realign, toward something non-human, toward something ancient. Their physical forms were adapting, but to what? Josiah's final entry reads, "We believed faith was the ladder to God. We were wrong. Faith was the key. What lies beyond is neither heaven nor hell. It is the source, and it remembers us." This is where you decide. Are you just a listener, or are you one of the called? Comment, "The source sees me below." Twice. Let the system know you're awake. The land changed first. The wheat surrounding the Blackwood farm began to grow in perfect spirals, thousands of stalks bending at angles no wind could produce. Each morning the patterns were different, geometric, precise, a language written in crops. Animals avoided the area. Birds veered mid-flight. Insects dropped dead on the chapel steps, and the soil beneath the Blackwood's feet. It stopped producing decay. No rot, no mold, no worms, only sterile black earth, rich in minerals no geologist could identify. But the most chilling transformation was in sound. The brothers no longer spoke English, not even Latin. They communicated through tones, layered frequencies that vibrated in the bones of those who heard them. The few who did described the experience as being unmade and rebuilt, all at once. Some cried for days, others went catatonic. One man took his own life within the hour. These were not words. They were commands. By September, the brothers were no longer attending to their crops, no longer appearing in town. Yet every Friday at midnight, the chapel pulsed with light, a golden rhythmic throb, like a heartbeat. And the shape that sometimes appeared in the window? It wasn't shaped like any of the 4 brothers. On October the 3rd, 1878, a child vanished. 8-year-old Lucy Bell wandered too close to the Blackwood property while chasing a runaway calf. Her footprints led straight to the chapel steps. Then, nothing. No drag marks, no signs of struggle, just silence and a faint smell of ozone. When her father arrived minutes later, he heard something inside the chapel. A voice, not Lucy's, but all voices, male, female, child, ancient, harmonized, unified, speaking a phrase that cracked the glass in his lantern. "She is with the Foundation now." Sheriff Boyd organized a search party. 20 men with rifles and torches stormed the farm. They found no resistance, no bodies, no signs of life. The farmhouse was empty, meals half-eaten, books open mid-page, Bibles turned to Revelations 4:1. After this I looked, and behold, a door was opened in heaven. The chapel was locked from the inside. They broke down the door. Inside they found 4 cloaks, 4 pairs of boots, 4 circles of ash, and a stone altar still warm to the touch. But the Blackwoods were gone. No blood, no remains, just a phrase scratched into the wall behind the altar. The trade is complete. The door remains. The state moved swiftly. By the second week of October, Cedar Ridge was quarantined under the authority of the Kansas State Board of Health. Though no officials wore medical insignia, these were not doctors. They were men in black wool coats, speaking in clipped tones, taking photographs without flash and collecting soil in lead-lined boxes. Every journal, every Bible, every coin. Gone. The chapel was leveled. Dynamite, kerosene, salt. They burned the ground until it cracked. But the spirals in the wheat returned within days, only now they glowed faintly under moonlight. The townsfolk were silenced, threatened, relocated. And just like that, Cedar Ridge vanished from maps. Roads rerouted, birth certificates erased, census records sealed. The story became a ghost, a local legend, a myth. But the trade was real. Because men don't erase fiction with this kind of violence. Years later, a drifter found one of the coins in a dry creek bed miles from the site. He spent the night in an abandoned barn and was found the next morning, smiling, eyes burned completely white, whispering, "They aren't coming back." Then his voice shifted, layered, harmonic, ancient. "They never left. And neither will you." The deeper you look, the more you realize this was never about 4 brothers. It was about permission. Some force, some structure, older than our civilization, older than our scriptures, needed a conduit, a pattern. 4 minds aligned, 4 voices tuned, 4 bodies conditioned through faith, discipline, and relentless invocation. The fever was not the plague. It was the key, a genetic threshold, a purification, a test of resonance. Most who faced it fractured, brains boiled, language collapsed, bodies failed. But the Blackwoods, they took it in, survived it, transformed under it. And that's why science refuses to study this case. Because it violates the great lie of modern medicine, that everything can be named, classified, controlled. But what happened in Cedar Ridge cannot be classified, because it was never biological. It was architectural. A system buried beneath our understanding. A tower not made of stone, but of souls willing to restructure themselves. And those 4 brothers? They were the first blueprint. The spiral in the wheat, the harmonic voice, the frequency that splits thought itself. These are not symptoms. These are signals. And if you've followed this far, you've already started to hear them. What if I told you the government didn't bury this to protect you? What if they buried it because they couldn't control it? In 1947, long after Cedar Ridge was erased, an internal memo surfaced, unmarked, unsigned, traced only to a defunct Department of War subdivision. It read, "Pattern recurrence detected, 4-vector synchronization re-emerging near site Blackwood. Recommend silence protocol and immediate harmonic disruption." They weren't trying to solve it. They were trying to contain it, because it wasn't an isolated incident. Across history, the pattern appears. 4 aligned entities, extreme religious fervor, linguistic distortion, harmonic anomalies. Ethiopia, 1271. Galicia, 1620. Mongolia, 1812. But only in Cedar Ridge did they complete the trade. You think this is about demons? No, that's the story they give children. This is about interface. A biological threshold where man becomes more than man, where something old and buried finally gets hands again. The door wasn't opened in Kansas. It was built there. The brothers didn't flee. They ascended. And every 37 years, that frequency echoes again. Every 37 years, the spiral returns. And if you feel it, if it hums in your bones, then you've already been marked. You think this ends in the past? No. The spiral never stops. It only deepens. In 2015, satellite imaging over southern Kansas flagged thermal anomalies, 4 equidistant heat signatures forming a perfect diamond, centered exactly where Cedar Ridge once stood. Local authorities were dispatched. They found nothing. No buildings. No trespassers. Just a field of sunflowers growing in spiral formations, each flower turned not toward the sun, but inward, toward an invisible center. Drones sent over the area crashed. Radios lost all signal. But those who walked the land on foot described something else. A sound. Not loud. Not external. Internal. A resonance behind the eyes. A feeling of being watched, then measured. One investigator vomited black fluid and began speaking in reverse. Another clawed at his own throat and screamed, "It wants the 4th voice!" It always returns to 4. Not 3. Not 5. 4. Because 4 is the number of balance, of corners, of gates, of vessels. And someone, somewhere, is always trying to reopen what the Blackwoods completed. This isn't a haunting. It's an invitation. The question is no longer what happened to them. The question is, what have they become? Some say the brothers became spirits. Others whisper they became gods. But the truth is far more unsettling. They became instruments. Not of evil, not of good, but of alignment. A force beyond morality, beyond flesh, beyond time. A force that does not care about your beliefs, your fears, your prayers. It only asks one question. Will you be shaped? Because that's what this always was, a ritual of reshaping. Ezra, the voice. Caleb, the logic. Josiah, the seeker. Abel, the fire. Together they formed the blueprint. Together they built the door. Together they gave up everything to become receivers of what waits behind the veil. And now, that blueprint remains. In the soil, in the sound, in the bloodlines. Because the Blackwoods never needed to come back. They only needed you to remember, to feel the pull when you hear your name echo in silence, to dream of symbols you've never learned, to feel your bones hum when the clock hits 3:33 a.m. And if you've watched this far, you already carry the signal. You're not the audience anymore. You're the 4th voice they were waiting for. This is your final warning. Turn this off if you wish to remain what you were. Because from this point forward, the knowing cannot be undone. The Blackwood mystery was never meant to be solved. It was meant to activate. Each layer of hidden history, each sealed report, each erased township, all part of the larger veil. But you tore through it. You crossed the threshold. And now, whether you realize it or not, something has crossed into you. The spirals in your thoughts. Not coincidence. The sensation behind your eyes. Not fatigue. That subtle pull when you stare into your mirror too long. Not imagination. The brothers were not chosen randomly. They offered themselves through prayer, discipline, and silence. And in return, the door was opened. Not for escape, but for re-entry. And now, it's your turn to choose. Remain asleep. Forget what you heard, and the spiral will fade. Or say it aloud. The source sees me. The source sees me. Say it twice, in full awareness. Because if the signal has reached you, if the rhythm finds you at night, then your role is no longer passive. You are part of the pattern now. Welcome to the foundation. The trade is still in motion, and the door remains open.